Welcome to Central Women's Media Team's series called Her Story, My Story. And I'm Debbie Briggs, the host today. And we have Erin Stearns, who I'm going to introduce in just a minute. But I want to remind you that some of the information that we have, most of the information on the Her Story chats are sensitive. So you may not want to have children in the room when you're listening to the Her Story chats. So this series has been like three-faceted. The one part of it is learning how to create a timeline and understanding your story, the history of your story, and kind of embracing it. So that's one part of it. And there is a podcast that teaches you how to create a timeline. Another part of it are these Her Story, My Story chats, where we learn from other women. And what do we do with that? You know, and we're all going to do something different with that. And so those Her Story chats, Her Story, My Story chats is what we're doing right now today. And then the third part of this is there is a blog post that you can also access, and that helps you to go deeper if you want, to encourage you to journal, to look at scriptures that relate to looking in a mirror and owning your story, and then bricks in your backpack, what that looks like if we hold on to bricks in our that's hard to say, bricks in our backpacks, and what it looks like to give them up and to be lighter in our lives because we have. So that gives you an idea of what we've been doing with this series. And Erin, thanks for coming today. Erin Stearns is here, and I love your shirt, Celebrate Recovery. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But right now, let's see, we met about 5 years ago, right?
Just about.
In the Moms Group in Mesa?
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite places.
Yes, which I think you're going to relate to probably today.
Absolutely.
And I immediately thought, wow, I love this gal. She leans into Jesus. She leans into life. She wants to just woof. And then it was not too much later that I met Will, her husband, because my husband and I were doing the financially free kids, you know, raising financially free kids. And your hubby wanted to come, and it was awesome because he came to our house with two men. The three men faithfully came to this series because their wives could come. And so I could learn to love on Will a little bit too, and learn to love them. So anyway, as we approach our valley, and that's what we're going to talk about for most of the time, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about your life so we can see a peek in your life before we go to your valley.
Okay, so I know I'm a mom and I'm a wife. So I know, obviously my kids are a peak. And obviously, I would hope obviously that my husband and getting married to him and having him in my life is a peak, which it is. Absolutely. But I was thinking about, before kids, what was my peak? I did the timeline. And one of my peaks was graduating medical assisting school when I was 22. I kind of coasted through high school.
Mm-hmm.
I never really found something I really loved to try hard enough. And so I went to medical assisting school when I moved out here, and I graduated with honors, which means I got straight A's, and I got extra credit for I missed, I think, half a day in 18 months. And so that's a peak for me. And then after kids and all that, my peak is definitely when my husband got baptized. Tears are going to start already, but that's okay, right? That was a life-changing event for our whole family.
That was at a men's weekend, correct?
It was a men's challenge.
Yeah, a men's challenge.
Yep.
And he came back and he had given his life to Christ.
Yep, he called me. I was at service and he said, "Are you okay if I get baptized here?" I'm like, please do. Don't wait for me. If God's calling you, And I just remember being in the lobby with Jenny Marie just crying because he's getting baptized. So I didn't get to see it firsthand, but I was praying for it.
Wow.
So
that is quite a peak.
It was a catalyst for our family. And so
That's awesome.
yeah.
And now we bridge to the valleys of our lives. And I want you to tell your story. We can't tell each other's stories.
No.
We have our story. We hopefully own our stories, and what we do with our stories, it's up to each one of us. And I've loved what you've done with your story, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But Erin, start out by talking about this valley of celebrating recovery.
Okay, so my valley started a long time ago. I hit 40 this year, but part of my celebrating recovery is celebrating a meth addiction when I was 20. I'm 20 years free from that. Not a single time that I've relapsed or I've come back. And so my valley started, 20 years ago. And part of my story is I'm doing my timeline and looking back. And part of my story is I wasn't raised in a Christian home, and it wasn't awful, but it was not perfect, just like any other home, right? And just had a bad breakup, gotten with the wrong crowd when I was a senior in high school, and just kind of went down from there. My valley started, I should say. And from 17 to 20, I was doing all sorts of drugs and alcohol, and trying just to maintain my life as a kid, having a full-time job and going to school full-time, still doing that. And during that time, my dad got sick, and he had some blood clots removed from his brain. And that was in the fall of 2021, 2001, because I'm old, of 2001.
She's old.
2001, just after I graduated, my dad got sick, and he ended up going back into the hospital and spent the course of 3 years just not recovering fully. He had some complications. He ended up having Alzheimer's and dementia because of it. And during that time, from 17 to 20, he was in and out of hospitals and rehab facilities and at home and a nursing home. And so when I was 20, just after my 20th birthday, my mom found my stash of not good things, and gave me a choice to go to rehab or to leave, but I couldn't stay home. And I couldn't take my car. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll be homeless completely. And I ended up going to a place called U-Turn for Christ in Paris, California. And that was a total God thing, because it's through Calvary Chapel Church. And I went through Calvary Chapel at times with one of my best friends growing up. So I was familiar. I was like, oh, I know that name. Like, I'll just go there. And it's at that place where I want to say I found Jesus, but we all know that I was never lost from him. It's just he reached me, and in that time,
He became real in your life.
he was real, so real. And in that time, my dad passed away when I was in rehab. So I was about 2 months sober. I had just accepted Jesus, and about a week later, we got news that he wasn't gonna make the night, basically. And I had a choice to go home to say goodbye or stay. And I stayed, because Jesus can take care of my family. I can't do anything to prevent this or make it easier. And I knew the dangers of relapsing, and I wasn't going to go back. And so I stayed. So I did get to go to the funeral, but then I ended up completing another 6 months of the rehab, the second part of it. So that's where my valley started.
Okay.
And rehab.
And then there's a gap. I'll let you tell your story. There's a gap.
Yeah, there's a big gap. So I ended up moving out of state with my aunt and uncle, and then to Washington. I'm from California, and I lived up there for about a month, and I moved to Arizona, and that's where I moved back in with my mom. She moved here after my dad passed. We had family out here, so I moved back in with my mom, and I went to medical assisting school, and I was clean and sober for about 2 years after rehab, and I just got in with the wrong group of friends, and there weren't bad friends. It was just, they were just not godly friends, and going out the weekends, and so I got kind of sucked back in. And part of recovery is like a big part of shame, right, attached to my story, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. But I did, although I never went back to doing drugs, I did get sucked into the alcohol. And so that was kind of a high, like, ups and downs. I never really thought I had a problem.
At this point, you're how old?
21, 22, I would say. 22. And so yeah, it was just kind of not a blur. I mean, I held a job. I paid my bills. You know, I was very functioning. I met my husband during that time. And he, we had a lot of fun. There was ups and downs though, for sure. We went to church sometimes. He was raised LDS and he didn't, want to go to the LDS church. And I, said, well, I know something's kind of missing in my life. I'd like to go back to church. So we'd go on the weekends when we weren't too hungover, honestly, to get up and go. But we were quite committed. And we ended up getting married through City of Grace, which is funny because City of Grace used to be Central, and then it was City of Grace. And then, they went to Hillsong and now the City of Grace again. But I just think it's funny. I was like, oh, I was always kind of drawn to Central. Like even back when, we got married through the church, but we're really kind of all in for Jesus. We're just kind of still doing our thing, when things went wrong and we had a problem, we'd say, God, please help us with this, and he always came through. We got our first house when I was pregnant. It was 2 weeks to delivery and we moved into our house, and it was such a God thing because we had no money for a down payment and we had people bless us with some money. And so 2 weeks before I was due with my first child was when we moved into our house.
Wow.
Such a God thing. That was a peak.
Definitely a peak.
But it was a valley before then because we're like, what are we going to do? So God always shows up, right?
He does. God always shows up.
Yeah. And so then I was working and had another child, Ellie.
And right now they're how old?
Eli's 12 and Ellie is 7. And a half. You got to get that half.
The half in.
There. It's very important when you're under 20 to have that half.
It's important.
Yeah. Not so important now. I don't tell people I'm 40 and a half. It's not a thing.
I love it.
So when I was when I had Ellie, I became a stay-at-home mom. And that was really hard. And it was a peak for sure. I got to stay home and live kind of this new life. But I kind of wrapped my identity in work. And I didn't have that anymore. Now I'm like, oh, I'm just a mom, and it's funny to say that now because that's the biggest job I have. That's my first ministry is being a parent. But it was really hard. It was a really hard adjustment. And I did not handle it well with the right coping mechanisms. And I've looked back, and when I did the timeline, I know God really uses my friends. He really uses my friends. And I thought I was never a person that really went with a crowd or anything like that. And I wasn't swayed by who was around me, but boy, am I. I really, my dad used to say, you are the company you keep. And I scoffed at that. And now it's just a constant play in the back of my head of
community is huge.
Who you surround yourself with.
Yes.
And I wasn't surrounding myself with people who were building me up. I was surrounding myself with people who were struggling themselves.
Yes.
And we were drinking. At 10 o'clock in the morning, some days I was drinking. And just to, I guess, not feel so alone and isolated. And then I met a friend through a marketing company that I was doing at the time. And she had said, you should join my mom's group. And I was like, no, thanks. I'll pass. I kindly declined 3 or 4 times. And she was persistent because God had told her, hey, she needs to come. And she's like, God, I don't know why you keep making me ask her, but I'll ask her. And she was faithful. And in that faithfulness, I was able to find moms, a new community, and my valley didn't just immediately go up. You had to climb the mountain back up to the peak. But I did that slow and steady with Mom's Group in Central.
So women need women. And
they need good women.
They need good women.
Good, godly women.
And moms need moms.
Absolutely.
Because there are times when you just don't know where to turn.
And you're so lonely, and you think you're the only one, and you're not. Yes. And you think you're the only one, and you're not. And that's the same thing with recovery too. We all have our things that we're dealing with, and the enemy likes to say, hey, you're the only one. You are so alone. And
the lies of Satan.
Yeah. And God's like, no, you're not alone. Look, I have this person for you. I have this person for you. And so he's really faithful in that.
That's awesome. So where does the story go from there?
Okay. So I joined Mom's Group and I was like, hey, I really like this place. I told my husband at the time, I said, hey, you don't have to go to church. I'm not going to make you go to church with us, but this is where the kids and I will be on the weekend. So if you'd like to be with us, you can come, but I can't force his relationship. And that's something I learned through recovery is I have no control over my husband or my children or my friends or anybody. I have control over myself.
It's about
and
me.
so it's about me and my relationship with God and what that looks like and how that leads others. Right. And so I said, hey, we're going to be here. You can join us or you can, stay and watch football, but this is where we're going to go. And he is such a good husband. And he said, I'm not going to let you go somewhere alone. And so he came with us. I know it could have been very different.
It could have been very different.
But and prior to that, I joined Mom's I was in it a few months and I was just praying every day, God, help my husband to have the same urge, the same wanting of going back to church. And so, not luckily, but gratefully he did. And from there, he did the men's challenge. I encouraged him to do that. I said, this is so important that I will pay for it with my own money for you to go. And he's like, wow, because money was a big stronghold for us for a long time. And he's like, wow, if it's that important that you're going to spend your own money to do this. And I wasn't working at the time. I was just kind of doing little side jobs here and there. So that was a big deal to offer. And he went, and that's a whole story in itself of how he got there and the men that were in his cabin leading him and guiding him, but he ended up getting baptized, like I shared, and that was huge, life-changing. But I want to say in that, that wasn't a fix-all.
Yes.
That's not, being baptized isn't a fix-all. That now, okay, great, he's going to go to heaven and be with Jesus forever, but that doesn't mean our life was perfect after that. So from there, I kind of have to go on my timeline here because there's a lot of peaks and valleys in here.
That's great. I love it.
It's so helpful, isn't it?
That's
so much
great.
stuff. I have two sides. So from there, I ended up actually going back to work at Central when they opened the Tempe campus.
I remember that.
So I went from not, drinking in the morning to going to Mom's to attending regularly to working at the church, being called to that. And that was awesome. And then COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I had a whole, 6 months of I want to say freedom, but that's not quite the word, from my children, because that sounds awful. But I had 6 months of something that was my own, to be called to before COVID hit.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was actually 6 months sober. Once I started working at the church, not a single drop until COVID hit. And I remember thinking, how am I going to do this sober? How am I going to be with my kids 24/7 again and go back to that place of not having it out and sober? I felt like that was my only choice. And it creeped in so fast, Debbie, where it was, okay, I'll just drink on the weekends. And then it was every other night, just a glass of wine here. And then by the end, I don't want to say end of COVID because it was by 2021, from 2019 in September, to not drinking and to COVID hitting and staying home in March. Fast forwarding until 2021, I was drinking at least a bottle of wine every single night. Every single night. And it was one of those things where I'm like, well, just excusing it, right? It's not a problem because I drink all my water every day. I'm eating right. I would actually adjust my calories on my app to be able to not go over so I could drink. I would add in my calories to my app for alcohol to make sure I wasn't going over every day.
So you're trying to justify the fact that it was fine.
Right. Motherhood's hard. We're all in this together, right? It's all COVID. Everyone. I feel like there was a big uptick in drinking and just those unhealthy coping mechanisms during COVID. And I feel like that's across the board. Some people went overboard in the other way and, it was exercise or sourdough bread making, or,
Yes. So there came a time when you looked in the mirror, we talk about owning it, and you said, enough's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. When was that? And then you realized, I've got all these bricks in my backpack, and it's just wearing me down. Like, what happened?
So heavy. I feel like at that point I was just dragging inch by inch my bricks. Right. Well, I'm slowly adding more, like maybe letting a few crumbles out.
Yeah.
So in 2021, church opened up again. We started going back to church, right? Built that community that's so important. We went back there. And I heard they must have did like a mental health series. I went back in my notes to try to see like, when was it that I heard? But I heard something about
She was leaning in.
I was
See,
leaning
again,
in.
this is true to who you are. You struggled, but she always comes back to leaning into Jesus. Go ahead. I had to answer that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I heard something about Celebrate Recovery, and that was like January, February, and then in June of 2021, God used a friend, right?
Yes.
That I met at the moms group.
Yeah.
That he called me to invite me. Hey, I'm going to Celebrate Recovery. It's right by your house. There's childcare. It's free. You know, it's a night out away from your kids.
I have to ask you, did she know you were struggling then with coming back to alcohol a little bit, or?
I mean, yeah, at that point, I feel like we all were. The community that I built in Mom's Group carried me through COVID. And I think that's like a really good takeaway of the importance of community and church.
So you could bear your problems, and they knew because you were bearing your problems.
Right.
Okay.
And they
love that.
They could see. And
Yes.
as without reaching out, I mean, we both were struggling, and we were both kind of sharing that. And so she, knowing that, invited me to. And it's nice to have a friend and to not be alone going new places, right? And so she invited me, and I was like, okay, this is awesome. Like, I'm starting to feel lighter and starting to recognize, oh, I need some help with some things. And I knew, because I cried out to God, I kind of don't want to do this anymore, right? I was not able to sleep one night, and just all the thoughts were really heavy and just playing over and over in my head. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore, but I can't. I cannot do it on my own. And then, you know, the timeline got the ripple effects, right? God's like, okay, I hear you.
And I can stop this, and it's up to me to stop it.
Yeah, but we have to be willing. And, you know, like, I'm learning about like false humility right now. We're doing another step study, which I'll share about, but we have to be willing to step out too. God's always constantly calling us, and we can be like this.
Yes.
Or we can be like, what was that, God?
Yeah.
You know, like, I can hear you. What was that? A little louder next time, please.
Yeah.
But he heard me. There's a song that I was listening to on the way here that had me in tears. I sought the Lord, and he heard, and he answered. And I'm listening to it, and he's just showing me little blips of like, remember when you sought me and I heard you and I answered? Oh, I just got to remember that. I'm going to share all about it, I promise.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we joined Celebrate Recovery, and it was really starting to change me, and the joy was coming back, right? And just being able to be like, you know, the situation kind of stinks right now still, but that's okay, because I know that God has me, and I trust that he has a plan in all of this. And my marriage was not doing well at that point. We were talking about counseling, but counseling is expensive, Debbie. It's really expensive, and we didn't have the money. And so we ended up going to Celebrate Recovery, and they mentioned a step study, which is where you just dive deeper into each kind of step they give you. It's just a deep dive into healing. And to put it very...
And all through this, you're looking deeper into scriptures.
Yes,
God
doing my
says-
devotionals,
Yes.
and starting to listen from secular to worship music.
Yes.
Starting to do just different things within the church. Like, we did the parenting class with you, and we did a couple of marriage groups with the Thomases. And so
Yes.
like we were, hey, something's not right. We still love each other. We're not giving up on this, but it was just not enough. And because we each had our own individual healing to do, which is so important. And so, and another, like, I pray, right, for my husband, because God says as wives, we need to be praying for our husbands, and that can make all the difference. And so I'm praying for him and trying to let go of the control of, like, you need to do a step study too if I'm going to do on, you know, like, you need to do this. It's like, I somebody had mentioned to him, hey, you should do a step study. And then he told me, I was like, okay, God, please just put it on his heart to do a step study. And then he told me when we got home, I think I want to do the step study. I was like, praise God, do the step study. And so in that, we're like, hey, we got to give ourselves the best shot of healing. And this is where the alcohol stopping started. And our sobriety started when we did our first step study. So October of 2021, 20 years after rehab, mind you, that we started a step study, and we said, hey, we're going to just not drink during the step study because we have to heal. And if we're trying to Band-Aid and cover up our feelings that we've been running from, we're not going to actually heal, and nothing's going to be fixed. And so we both agreed, hey, we're not going to drink during the step study. And then about halfway through, God, I can hear him loud and clear. He's like, you need to stop. You need to stop for the rest of your life.
This is not a pause.
This is not.
This is a stop.
Yeah, and I think what I heard actually was, and I like to think God, like it's a personal relationship, so he's going to talk to me the way that I need to be talked to.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's not so gentle because I need that, right? And so he said, hey, you're pretty useless to me when you're drinking. And I'm hearing that you want to be used by me. And I was told back when I was 20 that I'm supposed to share my story, and I didn't listen. And he said, you're pretty useless to me right now. Like, I love you and you're great and all, but like, I need you for things. And I'm either going to use you or I'm going to use somebody else.
Well, I have to interrupt here. Yeah. God is using her in huge ways, which will go there, Jen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's what I heard. And I told my husband, I said, hey, I think God's calling me, or, God's calling me to stop drinking. And I've shared this before. He's like, I don't think he is calling me into that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, we'll see. And I just pray. And then, a couple months later, he says, yeah, I'm being called to the same thing. Right. And so we're October of 23 was our 2-year sobriety stakes, which is huge. That's a big peak for me.
Oh, I see that huge peak on the timeline. That's great. Yeah. What a story.
Yeah.
I want to know how God is using you right now, and then I have another question after that. But tell everyone what God is having you do through all this and because of all this.
Okay, so one of the questions in the step study that we did recently was, how has your church involvement changed since recovery? And so before I was in Celebrate Recovery, I was in the moms group. I was in a community group. We did the marriage classes. I'm doing, on the events team and just getting plugged in here. But I will say, since I really leaned in to the truth that God really is calling me to something, and he really actually has a plan, like a very specific plan for us and for me, that I just said, I'm going to say yes to whatever God is calling me to.
And that's your word for the year.
That is my word for the year. It's yes. And that was last year, and I'm just continuing it on. And before, it was very shameful about my past and my story. And it's as a Christian, we're not supposed to struggle with these things. And what kind of Christian are you?
Lies.
We all, that's why we need Jesus, right? And
that's why we're doing this.
Struggle.
That's why we're doing this series.
Right. And so we I've just been saying yes to God. I said, oh, that sounds terrifying. I'll do it. So I was asked to lead the moms group. That sounds terrifying. I want to say no. I'm going to say yes. I was asked to share my story a little bit at the women's retreat. I said, that sounds terrifying. Yes, I'll do it. I was asked to MC a women's conference. And
I was there at all of those things. So
that was incredible. That was a peak for sure of being able just to be completely terrified. And then at the end, God's like, see, you had no reason to be afraid. All you had to do was trust. Right. And so we did a women's conference, and I did some of the Bible studies, like the summer Bible study series. I did a blog and a video. And you did podcast.
Yeah, and you did the video for church where one weekend you were featured.
Oh, yes. That's coming up. I don't know if they've shared that.
Oh, I saw it, a leadership thing.
Yeah, yes. They've shared it a few times. It might be coming up soon. I can feel it. But yeah, God's just like, you don't have to be ashamed, because I took that when I went well, I took that when I went on the cross. I took all the shame from you. And so now he's just using me. I'm leading a step study at our Celebrate Recovery where we just hit halfway through. And there's something about using my story and being able to say yes to God and sharing that with other women and being vulnerable, and then watching them share and be vulnerable and watching the healing God is bringing through that is just incredible.
That's awesome, yeah. Erin. You've just been leaning in. I'm going to ask one more question. And again, would you encourage other women to do a timeline so that they can embrace their peaks and valleys and start to think about unloading bricks maybe that haven't been unloaded? Is that something you think is very helpful?
Absolutely. If there's something that I learned over the past few years of recovery, of really diving into my recovery, that two things can be true. And I know Jenny Marie says it a lot. Two things can be true. We can be really sad, but still have joy.
Yes.
Right. And the peaks are the peaks because there's valleys.
Yes.
Right. There's got to be that difference so you notice.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of our growth and our learning comes in the valleys, so we can spread that to others during our peaks. Right. And I know I've been through a lot in my life, and I don't realize it until I get it on paper of, wow, like these are the times I was struggling, and then just being reminded that, yeah, God showed up. There. It's just, if you're feeling low, if you're feeling like everything's so low, or if you're feeling like you're on a crazy high, it's all God, and God's working through all of it. So I highly encourage people to do I wish I can zoom in on my timeline. It really is, like an EKG. It's our heartbeat of our life. And God really shows up in that. And just to be reminded of those times when God was faithful, and even when you're alone, it didn't feel like it. Right?
That's awesome.
He's never left us.
So we need to end, but what would you tell women who are struggling with a valley right now? What would you capture from them?
I really just want to say, like, you're not alone. You're not alone. And whether it's addiction you're struggling with, whether it's substance abuse, alcohol, codependency, just hurts of your past, hurts of current life, you're not alone. And God is calling you close to him, and he's putting people in your life, and he shares you, and he wants the freedom for you, and he's already ordained it. He's already planned it all out. You just have to trust
and lean in.
So
good at that. Erin, thank you so much for being here today. And I know this story is going to touch many lives.
Thanks, Debbie.